I live by a coaching creed, man. If you can't get a yard, you don't deserve to win. And that was the case for us in this game. We had several sequences where we had an opportunity where if we gained a yard, it's significant in terms of the development of the outcome of the game, and we were unsuccessful.
That was Coach Tomlin earlier today during his weekly press conference. The Steelers are no longer perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Extra Point presented by Microsoft Surface. I'm Missi Matthews. The Steelers fell to the Washington football team 23-17 yesterday here at Heinz Field. Let's introduce you to today's panel to try to make sense of what happened. We have former Steelers outside linebacker Arthur Moats in the house. Bob Pompeani still with his victory wine. Not sure what we're going to do about that today. And Matt Williamson from Steelers Nation Radio here as well. Guys, you heard Coach there. If you can't get a yard, you don't deserve to win. And Arthur, we'll start with you. What was the most upsetting or confusing thing about yesterday's loss to the Washington football team?
To me, the part that was most confusing or frustrating is how I like to put it, was the fact that a lot of the errors were self-inflicted. When we talk about the drops they had yesterday, 7 of them, I believe, on offense, that's far too many. They are too talented for that. That, to me, is self-inflicted. When we talk about some of the running game inefficiencies, the lack of effective running, we've talked about that for a couple of weeks now. That was still more so self-inflicted. Then when you look on the defensive end, having a miscommunication in coverage that led to a touchdown. Once again, self-inflicted. So to me, that's the most frustrating part. I don't mind the team taking a loss. I don't mind if a team is outplayed or if a team has just better personnel. But when it's self-inflicted, when you are a large part of the reason why you weren't successful, to me, that's the most frustrating part.
Pomp, what about you after yesterday's loss?
First off, this wine is going away because that's a celebratory thing. Instead, we're going to go for the hard stuff. So what I think, Missy, mostly is I'm just confused about what's happened to the run game. And again, I'm not suggesting they are a run-first team. What I am suggesting is when you have situational running, you better be able to pull it off. And that's what I've been kind of saying for the last couple of weeks. It was not too long ago, guys, that we saw the Steelers have 5 100-yard rushing games with 5 100-yard rushing performers. James Conner had 3. Benny Snell had 2 there, averaging over 4.2 yards per carry, whatever it was. And now all of a sudden this has changed. And I'm just curious why it's changed. It's almost as if the short passing game became the default run game, and then the short passing game became the entire offensive game plan. And honestly, at some point, you have to be willing and able to run the football. It's short yardage. They try it on the goal line. And again, if you cannot do that, I think defenses know they're not even going to prepare for it, or at least they're not even going to keep you honest that way. And that's a problem, I think.
Matt, what was the biggest thing that left you scratching your head?
Yeah, those are all really good takeaways. And to reiterate what Moats was saying, too, the self-inflicted wounds now are two weeks in a row, with the drops and the mistakes that you bring upon yourself. And that's unacceptable. And this is a much better coached and led team than that. I expect those things to get corrected. But what has me most concerned isn't necessarily what we saw on the field, but what we might be seeing going forward. And I don't want to make excuses for this team, but in the second half, they were vastly outplayed. And they look like a team that's played 3 games in 12 days and didn't really get a bye and are starting to really have some injury issues. And some big picture things really have me concerned right now.
The fluidity.
I was going to say, Matt.
Sorry, go ahead, Mo.
I was going to say, and Matt, you hit on it too, man. When you talk about some of the injuries, we saw that especially in the second half. You were already down Steven Nelson, but now Joe Hayden was going down. You were down Spillane. This is the first game without Bud Dupree. I think that definitely had a large impact, because now when you talk about being down, you're starting 2 corners, and we know how much man-to-man defense this team likes to play. Just from a personnel standpoint, you're going to be a little bit shorthanded from that standpoint as well.
Yeah, and along those lines, last week, everyone looked at the Ravens and said, look at all the guys they're missing. This is a JV squad. Well, the Steelers didn't have Connor and Pouncey and Tuitt, and they're pretty beat up for the last couple of weeks, and there's no rest in sight.
The fluidity of the offense is something else Coach Tomlin talked about today. Weeks ago, said we need to put emphasis on the run game again. But to me, guys, when you see 3rd and goal and you're throwing to Gerald Hawkins, who was just lifted off the COVID-19 list, hasn't practiced in a number of days, is it that they don't want to run the ball or they aren't good at it? Arthur, what do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both. When it comes to them not being good at it, I think they have the running backs to do it. I think they have the personnel up front to do it. But we talked about this before as well. We're just not seeing enough push up front. We're not seeing them win enough of the line of scrimmage on run plays, or at least stalemate consistently. We're seeing sometimes where the back might have time, sometimes where it's a guy in the backfield already has to make somebody miss. So we're not getting a lot of consistency there. And in terms of the Gerald Hawkins pass on the goal line, I just looked at it more so as I like the call because it was a change of pace. And honestly, Hawkins was open. It wasn't as if the pass didn't hit him in the hands and they caught him off guard. That was there. I just think the execution wasn't where it needed to be. And I think that's the bigger issue right now. When what Pomp talked about in terms of if the Steelers want to go pass heavy and go with the short to intermediate passing attack as your substitute for the run game, just know by going that approach, your margin of error is very small now. You can't afford to have drops. You can't afford to not be in rhythm. And that's what we saw a little bit, especially last night, from the offense.
Pomp, is it time to be concerned? Like Arthur said in the beginning, it's one loss. They are still 11-1, but you didn't feel so great after that Ravens win, and then you come out of this one with a loss.
I just don't like the trend going forward, Missy. I think that's the thing I'm looking for. How they're playing, the fact that we heard Washington players pretty much say that they kind of knew the tendencies, and so they weren't even looking at a Steeler ground attack. You don't have to be the Cleveland Browns and run it like that. You don't have to be Derrick Henry, but you have to be successful when the time comes. And that's the thing. When other teams start, looking at tendencies and saying, well, they're not even going to bother, or this short passing game is so predictable that it's going to be underneath stuff. Well, you see batted balls. You see the more you throw, the more negative stuff can happen. And if you're going to drop it, it's even worse. So I'm just looking at it for something that can help them do what they want to do, play action. Right now, there's no play action because there's no one in the backfield ever. And Matt, I think the more of that goes on, the more likely it is you're going to have teams knowing and guessing correctly on what they're going to be doing offensively.
I 100% agree. And I really thought this was a big problem last year. And everybody can blame the quarterback situation last year, but their running backs were very much a tell. If Jalen Samuel's in the game, they're throwing. If Snell's in the game, they're not going to go his direction with the ball as a receiver. Connor at least brings a little bit of everything to the table. That would help. But, in order to get this running game on track, you really have to dedicate yourself to it. And that's not their best offense. That's not their best people on the field. And I think it's really clear, especially in crunch time situations, that goal line situation, they don't trust their running game. I mean, they can say they do, but they don't trust it. And it's a big problem to get back to trusting it. And in the meantime, you got to win games. And, they're a little bit in a predicament right now. And last one I want to throw out there, too, in terms of predictability, if they could connect on more of their deep balls, too. I mean, just different levels of passing would go a long way.
All right, guys, we are going to try to find the silver lining in yesterday's loss, the first of 2020 for the Steelers. We will do that when we return here on the Extra Point. Welcome back to the Extra Point presented by Microsoft Surface. A quick review of injuries today from Coach Tomlin's press conference. He said that Joe Hayden is currently in the concussion protocol. Robert Spillane's knee is still being evaluated, awaiting more information on that one. Steve Nelson, who missed yesterday's game, does have a chance to come back, and then James Conner and Marquise Pouncey, who are on the COVID-19 list, also have a chance to come off this week as well. And Chris Boswell missed yesterday's game. Practice will be our guide per Coach Tomlin. So let's find some positives in yesterday's loss. Arthur, we'll start with you. What is something that you can take away moving forward that you thought was a silver lining to the first loss?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like the obvious part is it was the NFC team, right? So that definitely helps us out. when you're talking about sitting at 11-1, we're still the number one team or the number one seed in the AFC. So that to me was the first silver lining. But to be more specific, I think that the injury to Robert Spillane, it gave Avery Williamson a larger sample size of being out there. And I thought that it was good for him to just get more comfortable in this defense, get more opportunities, because we know as this thing goes down going into the playoffs like that, his number is going to get called. So the fact that he was able to get some very meaningful snaps, both in the run game and passing game, I think that's going to pay huge dividends, especially depending on how long Spillane is out.
What about you, Pomp?
Well, I do agree with that tiebreaker situation, how important it is, Missy. And Arthur makes a good point. It's an NFC loss. You can be okay with that so long as you run the table and keep pace of Kansas City at this point. But I also thought T.J. Watt continues to play at that high level, even without Bud Dupree. That's something good. He did have a holding call. That was a significant call. But how many times has T.J. Watt been held and nothing's called? It was a legitimate call. That's part of it. But still, he's been good. They didn't make the turnovers yesterday. I expect that to happen again in Buffalo. That's still a strength of mine. But overall, they need to continue to just execute better. And I still think sometimes a loss can kind of send a little message. I know we hear that a lot. I don't know how many players actually believe it, but I do. I think sometimes they say, okay, now we better get serious. If you didn't think so before, you better think so now.
And speaking of TJ Watt, he almost forced the fumble and then recovered it himself. Go ahead, Moats.
Well, I was going to say, Pomp, I can't speak from experience. Yes, when you do take one of these losses, especially after going on a long run of successful outings, it does help you out. It does humble you. It helps you refocus and not only refocus, but it puts things in perspective. Things that you got away with when you were winning games, you kind of overlook it a little bit, or you critique it, but you don't go all the way there, because in the back of your mind, you're always telling yourself, hey, we still won the game, so it couldn't have been that bad. But when you have a loss, you really have to sit there and face the music. You can't fall back on that excuse of, well, it was good enough to win, because this time it wasn't. So without a doubt, man, you definitely use it as a motivational tool, and it does help you out. And sometimes, like you said, there are good losses to have, and I think this is definitely one of those.
Matt, is there a silver lining for you in this loss?
I really had a hard time coming up with one. I mean, just what we saw on the field, I struggled with this assignment, to be honest with you. I came up with three little things. I guess they're not little. I thought Alex Highsmith passed his first test. You know, as an every down player, I thought he looked pretty good and held up quite well. I will say that this group of pass catchers for Pittsburgh, I don't believe they're going to have the drops that they have the last 2 weeks going forward. I think those are fluky things, and I expect that to correct themselves. And last one I came up with, and this is a big deal against the front that they faced yesterday, Ben Roethlisberger isn't getting hit. Their sackless streak is pretty amazing, to be honest, for how often they throw. I understand the ball comes out quick, but 7 is not taking sacks, and that's something.
Yeah, still just 10 sacks this entire season. Another one I'll throw out to you guys, just James Washington, obviously the 50-yard touchdown, but Ben said after the Ravens win, we wanted to get him more involved, and I think they did do that yesterday. And maybe, like, I can't remember who was saying it earlier, that does present a problem, knowing that he can go for that deep ball moving forward in terms of maybe helping this offense get out of that funk.
But one thing, can I have one thing there, just that, Missy, on that topic? I think at this point, while he gets more snaps, more catches, it comes at someone else's expense. And it seemed like Chase Claypool was not as active, or didn't get the amount of activity that you would expect from a guy who's had such a significant impact. And so Mike Tomlin alluded to the fact that if guys don't catch it, then we'll put in people who can. I wonder what that means moving forward and who he was directing that to, because if you look at the list, it's Deontay Johnson and Eric Ebron who have the most drops, but I just can't imagine those two guys disappearing altogether. So I wonder how many snap and the division of labor that he likes to talk about will affect that wide receiving group.
And Pomp, I was going to say, man, not only that, but when you look at the targets right now, Deontay and Ebron this past game, 12 targets for Deontay, 11 targets for Ebron, and then you still had Juju with 10 targets, but Claypool and James Washington were both sitting at 4 apiece. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how that whole division of labor continues to clear itself out with the emergence of James Washington and also some of the struggles with the other guys right now.
All right, guys, I appreciate you joining me here today on the Extra Point presented by Microsoft Surface. That is going to do it for us. Hopefully we don't have to recap another loss this season, but we will see. Steelers are heading to Buffalo for a Sunday night football matchup this week. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Have a great night.
What's up, Steeler Nation? It's Stephon Tour. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Steelers official YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to stay up to date on everything going on in the Steel City. Thanks for being the best fans of football. Here we go.